I'm Georgia Stitt. I'm very, very excited to be your host for this conversation today. We are MUSE. We are a brand new organization. We are Musicians United for Social Equity. And this is our second event. We had one that is now available on our YouTube page that you can watch, our launch event, and this is our second one. What we're trying to do is build community and increase accessibility and showcase the work of people, of our BIPOC members and people who are working at the top of their game in the music departments in musical theater and start to build the community of other people who can do that. And I want to start today by saying that we have an amazing panel today. We have, I'm going to introduce who they are. Michael McElroy, Joseph Joubert, they're waving. Joseph, you wave. Sheilah Walker, Darryl Archibald, and Alvin Hough Jr. And the topic at hand is we want to talk about how there are so many different ways that you can find access into a career in musical theater. There's not a path. It's not like in the corporate world where you have an entry-level job and then you just keep getting promoted and then eventually by the time you're 40, you're at this level. It doesn't work like that. People come into this business and these various jobs from many different ways. And we suspect that there are many, many people out in the world who have the skills to do this kind of work and have never seen a space for themselves. So we wanted to interview some of our founding members and talk about the ways that they found their way into this business and just begin to open up the conversation about what the work is and how you might find your space into it. So just right off the bat, I want to start by talking about how for all of us, for everybody, probably everyone on this call, because that's why you're here, but certainly for those of us who are founding members of MUSE, there was some moment, there was some spark, something that made you say, oh, that's what I want to do. That is, I want to work in that business. That is the place for me. And I'm going to throw the question first to Michael McElroy. I'm going to read you just a little bit about Michael McElroy's bio here. Michael has a BFA in drama from Carnegie Mellon. He is the founder, music director, and arranger for the Broadway Inspirational Voices, a multiracial gospel choir comprised of Broadway performers, Tony-nominated actor for Big River, and Grammy-nominated arranger for Great Joy, vocal arranger for the upcoming Aida revival on Broadway, and he is an associate arts professor and academic director at NYU Tisch. So he has his hand in a lot of different pots. Welcome, Michael. I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Georgia.
And Michael, what I know is that you are the child of a church choir director. And I'm curious how you think about your musical education. What was your musical education like? How did you find your way into the world of music?
Well, it's interesting that you talked about this idea of seeing oneself. I grew up in my grandfather's church. My grandmother taught herself to play the piano. So then when my mom was born, she was at the piano at 3 years old. So she was a child prodigy and played classical, but also grew up in the church. And so I grew up with this love of, church music in all of its styles and theater music. And all of the people in my family played and led the choirs. We had 5 choirs at our church. And so my brother, my sister, my uncle, my mom, and I also had to play as well. So I grew up with this love of, and like you said, it's this idea of you don't really know what you can be until you see someone doing the thing that you want to do who looks like you, right? And so for me, being a church musician, I was surrounded by musicians. So I knew that was something that was open and possible for me, but it wasn't until I went to the theater and saw, I think the first show I saw was Porgy and Bess, the national tour, where I saw people who looked like me doing the thing that I had this spark that told me what was possible. So then it became this kind of dual journey of what I did at church and what kind of tools and ways in which I engaged the musical art form of gospel music. And then also growing up in the suburbs where I had a very strong music arts education choral program. So I had these 2 different ways that I've spent my life kind of bringing the 2 of them together. And that's where Broadway Inspirational Voices sits in that integration of both gospel and musical theater.
That's fantastic. That's so great. And thank you for that. And that makes me, I'm going to throw it right to Joseph Joubert next, who has a similar background. I know Joseph is the child of a Baptist minister and also has this church upbringing. I'm going to read you just a little bit of Joseph's bio. Started playing piano at 8. He's born and raised in New York City. And then he eventually wound up studying at Manhattan School of Music, which led to wider recognition as a solo pianist and as a symphony orchestra soloist. He has published several spiritual arrangements, and as a record producer and arranger orchestrator, he has worked with names such as Ashford and Simpson, Diana Ross, George Benson, Patti LaBelle, Whitney Houston, Cissy Houston, Jennifer Holliday, Dionne Warwick, Luther Vandross, Norm Lewis, and Diane Reeves, as well as working on many shows. I know it's embarrassing to sit and listen to people read off your bio, but that had to be said out loud. Right? All right, so Joseph, right, we said you're the son of a Baptist minister, but you also have a bachelor's and a master's degree from Manhattan School of Music, and you've gotten a lot of claim for being such a gifted and sensitive accompanist. I know that, having heard you play for so many different people as well. I think part of your gift is your facility with so many different styles. And I'm interested if you can talk a little bit about what that means to absorb the musical styles, the many different musical styles that you have grown up knowing and experiencing from many different sources, and how that translates into what you need to know as a writer, arranger, Broadway musician.
Sure. Okay. Am I muted? I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So again, similar to Michael McElroy, my dad was a Baptist preacher, and my mom played the piano, and my grandfather played. So I was, surrounded by music. But the thing with church is that for me, it was this. It was almost like theater because you're watching the musicians and you're watching the choir and the soloists. So I was always drawn to that music. So whether it be when we moved out to Bayside, there was a two musicians, and one was very classical. He had all these runs, and I was always watching them, and then the other one was very more gospel. And at home, I was listening to, so I listened to gospel music with my father. We had a Hammond organ at the church, so I was listening to jazz organ with Jimmy Smith. Then Motown was happening, so I was listening to Motown. Then I had classical records, listening to Horowitz and Van Cliburn and Rubinstein. So I never thought about it, as separate things. This was just a musical palette. So for me, when you talk about musical styles, it was just, it was just innate in me. So I think for each of us, it depends on what your upbringing is, will determine where you go. Because for me, I'm one of these hybrids where I don't like to be pigeonholed. I mean, I'm just as comfortable playing a classical piece as in with the gospel. Jazz is not like my forte, but I know jazz chords, and I was exposed to that, pop, Broadway. So it's a combination of all those things, but it started for me in the church, and then that, the upbringing of, when I was young, I actually had to wind up teaching choirs. I was, working with choirs as a young kid, and there would be, the anthem choir where I'd have to do the classical stuff, and then it would be the gospel choir. And then in school, because I was a good reader, I had to play for everyone. So I would get, music from, the classical players, and then the drama students would want me to play their pop things or their Broadway things. So it's just been part of my makeup of, but I think also the important thing is your training. For me, the classical training was my, sort of the grounding for everything, because, once I can read and play anything, because I started playing by ear first, it gave me that part of it, the ear and the improvisatory sense, and then coming with the classical training, it merged together. So I'm just this hybrid. It's hard to explain, but if I were trying to give someone advice, I would just say to expose yourself to as much music as possible and see what music speaks to you. I mean, everything doesn't speak to people, but for me, music is this universal thing where I'm just drawn to different styles because I was just brought up hearing everything.
We talked in the prep for this conversation about the music that's just in your bones, and then the music that you have to learn. And I think it's so interesting to identify, Joseph. You say you just listed all the things that you know inherently, and you're like, jazz, not maybe so much, but I learned how to read the chords, and that resonates with me. This idea that we all show up as professionals at some level with this idea of like, oh, that I know how to do that. I know how to do that. It's in my bone. And other things that we have to learn. That nobody, no matter how much of an omnivore you are, nobody can do all of it. There is a learning curve. There is a process for that. And that makes me think, I'm going to throw it to Sheilah next. Sheilah Walker. Oh yeah, I'm going to read your bio. Sheilah's career began in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. She conducted the pre-Broadway engagement of Porgy and Bess with Norm Lewis and Audra McDonald, also Ragtime on Broadway and in London, Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway, and the national tour of The Color Purple. Other tours include Hello Dolly, Pal Joey, Funny Girl, South Pacific, and others with a slew of stars. I'm not going to read all your stars, I'm reading your shows. She has a large career in regional theater and education, including the former chair of the vocal department at the Dallas Arts Magnet High School, where she was voted Teacher of the Year. Miss Sheilah Walker, thank you for being here. Sheilah, we were talking earlier about how you didn't grow up in that kind of church. You didn't have that kind of background. And I'm interested in what your early training was and what led you to work in this business, and what are the things you knew inherently and what are the things that you felt like you had to learn? Okay, wait, you're muted. You're muted. You're still muted. There you go.
All right. I'm there. Okay. I'm sorry. Ask the question again. I was trying to fix this again. You're asking me how I got started?
I said, well, we just talked to Joseph and Michael about how they started in the church and just absorbing a whole
Yes.
bunch of music there, but that's not what your background is. And so I'm interested when did you know that you were that this was a career for you, and what are the things that led you into this business? Because you came through a different
Well,
route.
like the others, similar to the others, I think I started out in classical music, taking piano lessons, and I was one little anecdote. I used to play as a kid at the studio in the downtown at the Beasley Music Company, because my teacher was in a studio there, and the guy who owned the place was selling pianos downstairs and asked me to to demonstrate the pianos for the potential buyers, and then I would get a free piece of music. And that's when I got interested in popular music, because I'd get a free piece of sheet music. And I learned that also to cheat a little bit. I'd get a little piece of paper and I'd get the one free one, but I'd look through all the others and find the chords of the others. And that's how I learned how to play chords really quickly, because I figured I'd get one free one and then I'd get 10 other songs. So then growing up, I was a classical pianist and all the little piano recitals and things that I did. But then I also watched TV, and I love theater music, and I liked Leonard Bernstein, who for me combined theater and classical music. And I thought, I want to be like that. And that was kind of a spark early on. Now, after high school, accompanying choirs, and did some church work, and different churches. I was playing a Catholic church, I was playing a Presbyterian, I was playing a United Methodist. I did a lot of hymns, a lot of anthems, and then went to college. And after college, I decided to become a choir director. So all those skills that I had learned in high school, working with singers, I carried it on to teaching professionally. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I really wanted to do theater. And it just something came to me when I got an opportunity to work at the Dallas Arts Magnet High School. And it was a theater-based school. So I started working through the Dallas Theater Center, and people were calling me to come and play for their auditions, and one audition led to another, and all of a sudden I got a chance to work in summer stock. Summer stock as an associate conductor, pianist, rehearsal accompanist, audition accompanist. I did a lot of that. So the local, I would say to anybody that if you're in a small town, like I had been in Texarkana, which is a very small town, moved on to Dallas, Fort Worth area, and still doing a lot of local theater, it gave me the incentive to feel that I could go to New York, because I had a lot of skills as a vocal coach, an accompanist, audition pianist. I could read pretty well, and then I knew I could conduct. And so I got all those skills ready before I moved to New York, and things happened from there, Broadway, and then I became more of a touring conductor. That's why on my resume I have so many touring credits. But I think the local opportunities that I got garnered from the things that I had learned as a child and as a voice teacher and a choral director prepared me for the work that I did on tour and in New York. In New York, excuse me.
Did you freeze or are you done? Can't tell.
I'm done.
Okay. The answer is the same. I froze
Yeah.
and I'm done.
Yeah, and that's it. And
All right.
scene.
And scene. Thank you, Sheilah. I love that, and I love. I think it's important. You know, we have many conversations among our own group about how not everyone has the aspiration to work in New York. The business is not only New York centric. Not everyone is dying to work on Broadway. There are lots of other markets, and so I love hearing about all the different places that you worked and the ways that you found to be a musician.
And the irony, I was going to say one more thing. The irony is that I spent about 15 years in New York, but I started going backwards. I did a lot of Broadway and then touring, and then I started doing now more local theater, regional theater. I've just worked in Seattle with a show, and I've done some things in Mississippi and New Mexico. And so I've gotten a chance to do, as a result of all the other tours and other things, I'm doing more local theater in certain regions of the country, and I'm loving it. It's just enjoyable.
That's great. And that look at that. You just set up a segue where now I can talk to Darryl Archibald. Darryl is based in Los Angeles, but has also worked all over the country. I'm going to read his bio, and there's a lot that I want to talk about. He was the music director and the conductor of national tours, The Color Purple, Motown the Musical, Memphis, Dreamgirls, The Lion King. He attended USC and majored in flute performance, but he also studied Russian language and constitutional law. He's a 2019 Ovation Award winner for music direction, including for ragtime. And he also plays the violin and has conducted opera, ballet, and symphony orchestras. So I love this. It's interesting how much we're talking about how many of you have classical training and classical background. I want to, this isn't the question for Darryl, but I do want to get back to not everyone has to have classical training, but Darryl certainly does. And I read a fun fact, Darryl, that the first album you bought at age 5 was 100 Classical Favorites. I loved reading that, the 5-year-old saying, that's what I want to listen to. But you started playing violin and flute very young, and I am interested in how much being a multi-instrumentalist and being involved in, as I know you said, the California Boys Choir and the LA Philharmonic Training Program shaped what your musical education was, that you came up in those ranks through those organizations that were specifically looking to music educate young people.
Well, for me, I think my fascination with music was probably the biggest thing. I couldn't get enough of music. And so I would hear things on the radio. I would hear things, you know, people, concerts that my parents took me to. And I wanted to know how all of that worked and how it fit together. So I begged my mom, I think it was on TV, they had a Time Life album thing when I was watching TV, and I asked her to please, please, please buy me these records. There were like 6 albums of all of these classical things. And I listened to it day and night. And actually right before that, I had started playing violin in the private school I was going to. And so then I started to want to get actual like sheet music. So my, dad would take me downtown to a place called Spring Music. Is a music store in Spring in downtown Los Angeles. And I would just get box loads of music. Even if I didn't know what it was, I just get scores and everything and bring them home. And so after a while, my parents decided to, give me piano lessons. They also, when I was around 7, I got into the California Boys Choir. And there, I think I got most of my training, because at 7, we had to learn music theory, we had to learn 4-part writing, we had to learn Kodai, we had to learn all of these things, for kids. It was really amazing. Plus, we got to perform with all kinds of wonderful groups and the, LA Philharmonic, New York City Opera, doing the kids' parts. Then from there, I started flute, which was the next thing that I did. And that got me really interested in symphonic work. But at 14, I was looking at, there was an ad in the newspaper for musicians for this production of The Frogs at Odyssey Theater in Los Angeles, a small 90-night seat theater. And so I begged my parents to let me go and audition for this thing. And I walked in, and they didn't know what to make of me at 14, but I got the gig. And the next thing I knew, there was the assistant musical director wasn't there for rehearsal, and they were like, who can play this? So I said, I can play piano. So I was playing piano for them in rehearsal. And then the next thing I knew, their next production was a play that needed music. And I was hidden behind the set in a chimney playing Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky for this show called Masterclass, which was about Stalin meeting with Prokofiev and Shostakovich and wanting to like change the way they did music. And I think from there is where, long story, long arc, from there is where I really got hooked on wanting to be in theater. And all of that training that I had from my classical upbringing, and also being so interested in how things worked, because I was always, when I would hear a vocal arrangement that I loved, I would try my hardest to get the music so that I could dissect it and figure out why that sounded that way, or why that style of music sounded this way. And I discovered Andre Crouch is where I got my gospel chops. And as far as musical theater, once I did that show, The Frogs, from there, I was doing things simultaneously. I was doing classical music and playing in orchestras. And every chance I got, I was either accompanying shows on the piano or playing in pits. And then finally I decided one day that I had to make a decision. And I decided I'd rather be in charge of everything than be, I hate to say this, than one of the musicians. So I decided to put the flute to the side and concentrate only on conducting, basically, and just to be honest, because I wanted to be in charge.
Right. Those of us who are conductors are, we have to admit that we're egoists as well. Like there's something about St. Mark raising his hand. There is something about like wanting to have the spotlight on you a little bit that is important.
Little anecdote quickly, sorry.
Yeah, please.
I was that really odd child, by the way, that when I was around 5 or 6, I would take my Fisher Price people and stage, I would put on operas like La Boheme or Tosca or Carmen, and I would take the little Fisher Price people and stage the operas and I would have all these books around the sets, and but I would spend all day doing that, and my parents would try to force me to go outside and do stuff, but I wanted to play opera with my Weevil people. So that was also another theater thing that I did.
Play opera with my little people. You know, that's Hal Prince's story too, is that he had little army men and he would stage shows. So you're right there with, with the greats. Fantastic. I love it. Great. And our final panelist is Alvin Hough Jr., who I'm excited for you to meet. Alvin was the music director of the Tony Award-winning revival of Once on This Island. He also has worked on The Color Purple on Broadway, Motown, and Scandalous, and tours of Memphis and Dreamgirls. He grew up in DC, also a classically trained pianist, performed at the Kennedy Center, at the Capitol, at the White House, and internationally. Alvin, you also have classical piano training, but you did not choose to major in music. This is when I was doing research for this panel, I went to your website and I was like, what's Alvin's story? And what I learned is that you have academic college degrees in earth and planetary sciences and meteorology from Harvard and Georgia Tech.
Wow.
Right? Okay. True. So I am interested in what your relationship to formal music training is. And when you think about formal education and what it is about your music training versus your academic training that shaped the kind of music that you turned out to be. I'm also interested, I'm going to ask you 2 questions at once because I want you to talk about that, but I also, you went to Harvard, you can handle this. I also want you to think about where you made the transition from being a pianist to being a conductor, because that seems to be a transition that many of us made, that nobody tells you how to do that. And they're a completely different skill set. So let's talk about formal training. How much of that you learned like in school and how much of that you learned on the job?
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here. Where do I begin? I start when I was 5. It's when I started playing piano. And I had a great teacher. She was retired from the DC public school system. Her name, Norma McCrae. I'll never forget her. She changed my life. It's so funny to look back on people and the decisions they make and to realize one of the smartest things that she did for me was to realize her own limitations and what she could and couldn't teach me. I got to the age of 13 and she wasn't this blunt to me when I was a kid, but she essentially told me, hey, you're starting to get good at this. If you ever think about doing this for a living and want to make money, you're not going to make money if you can only play Bach. she was like really real with me. And I didn't understand it then, but of course, I'm so grateful she had that conversation with me. So at 13, I had been, I'd been in the DC Boys Choir singing as a soprano. I had joined an opera camp at the Kennedy Center the year before. Like music was just part of who I was. But she said, you know what? I'm going to put you in two situations that I have high confidence that you are going to fail. But because of the failure and being surrounded by people who either love you at my church or will learn to love you, like at a summer theater camp, she gave me skills that I didn't know I had. Like I was used to, like my mom, love her to life, but I was an inner city Black kid in DC. I was listening to all the stuff she was listening to on the radio. I was listening to Anita Baker and SWV and, you know, Luther Vandross. Like I was listening to all that R&B and pop, loving it, but not realizing what else was out there. My teacher took me to my church and said, this kid's playing in the service. And there was no question. When she said something, she meant it. So I remember this to this day. I was across the pulpit from the organist, and we're playing the opening hymn. I don't know what key it was in. Let's just say it's an F. And you know, I'm playing it note for note because that's what I know how to do. And next thing I know, he locks eyes with me and points up to the sky. And little Alvin is like, oh, is there a bird in the church? Like, you know, I actually look up at the ceiling. Of course, the next thing I know, we're in G flat. And I have no idea what to do. I fall on my face, I fail. But I'm surrounded by church people. I've been going to that church for years. Like people who knew me would help me, would prop me up. And being in the church, you know, taught me things like how to do a tag, how to change keys all of a sudden. My classical teacher, quick reversal. The way I learned classically, 4 things for every song. Right hand first, left hand first, like right hand alone, left hand alone, both hands together, memorize. She had me memorizing things at a young age that I, you know, I fought back. I resisted at, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. But going back, oh my God, my brain does things I don't even want it to do. Like I get in an audition room, I'm like, oh, I've seen this piece of music before. Da, da, da. And it's there. It's like things that I've seen already and memorized, they're there. So I say for anyone, like in terms of advice, it's never too late to pick up a piece of music and just look at it and let your brain do the work that you may remember it down the road. Fast forward, I'm going back to theater. Growing up that same summer when I was 13, she took me to the Jewish Community Center in a suburb of DC to do theater. And the first show I ever did was Tommy, written by the Who. I knew nothing about rock. I knew nothing about anything about theater. It was eye-opening to me working with like grown adults. Like the guitarist was, you know, 40 years older than I was, but saw that I loved music. And he would stay after camp with me. And he also played some piano. And he would teach me how to play Pinball Wizard because that was such a difficult song to learn. And looking back, like I think like going to that summer camp, I went there 7 years in a row and we did Chess, Annie, Barnum, Grease, Joseph. Like we did all these amazing shows, but that got me to realize like maybe this is why I like theater, because theater can be rock, theater can be country, theater can be pop, theater can be anything as long as you have a story to tell. So I think that's what ultimately drew me to theater. My mother, I love her. Again, I've said that a lot. I love my mom. She loved me back. But she was always cautious. She's like, well, what if you break a hand? What if you break a finger? What are you going to do? I want you to do your best. What else do you like? Darryl, here's my embarrassing story. When I was like 9 or 10, she's like, what do you want? I forced her to buy me a rain gauge and I'd stick it in my backyard and I keep a little journal. I'd write down how much rain and snow fell with each event in DC, checking numbers, monthly totals, checking it against the averages. I was that kind of like nerd. She's like, oh, okay, so you like weather. This is good. Well, I just want you to do your best. Oh, you keep bringing home A's, so your best is A's, so you better keep bringing home A's. So I'm like, okay, all right, Mom, I see what you did to me there. Got into Harvard. I was paired with one of my freshman year roommates, had already written 4 musicals before he stepped foot in Cambridge. I'm like, oh, this wasn't an accident. He and I are still friends this day. He was in my wedding. Being on campus was great. I still did a lot of musical things, but I realized I didn't have to be tied down to music. I wanted to, I guess, to approach the world as I did music. Let every genre come to me. I really enjoyed weather. I was at Georgia Tech. I graduated the fall of '08. I was thinking I was going to, maybe work for the Weather Channel or something. I didn't know. But that's right when the recession hit and I couldn't find a job. So I had friends from DC say, hey, I think you're good enough to play piano in New York. And I thought they were idiots. I'm glad I listened to them because I got up here in January of '09 and haven't looked back. I'm going to get to your second question too. I've learned just over the 10, 11 years I've been up here, you have to learn when it is smart to say yes and when it is smart to say no. I know that I am not a technologically savvy person. So if someone says, hey, how good are you at Ableton? I'll be like, look, honestly, I don't know it. But if someone says, how good are you at conducting? Back when I couldn't conduct, the answer was, I can do that, even though I was lying. I think that's something that a lot of my mentors have taught me over the years, to know when to say yes and then immediately cram and run and learn everything you can. And then you realize so many things that you've learned, you haven't learned at the moment, you've like accumulated over the years. Like I can look back and I can think of many moments of watching my choir director back when I was learning how to sight transpose and doing all those things, watching how he would conduct big cutoffs and watching how he would signal everyone, no, catch my eye, we're going to loop it around, we're going to do a tag, we're going to do something. And taking from people I had seen and saying, I really like that. I really like that. I'm totally going to steal that. I have no idea what you meant by that signal. I'm never going to do that in my life. And just to figure out, what kind of works for you. Like this may sound weird to some of you. I actually find it hard to listen to music like casually. I honestly don't know how to do that well because my brain just doesn't shut off. I'm like, oh, that was an amazing chord progression. You went from the flat 5 to this. And like my brain is constantly working. So for me to sit down and just do something else while listening to music kind of never happens. So if I'm in a situation where there's music happening, I'm always trying to study and learn from the person next to me in the pit, the conductor over here. Like, I'm always trying to learn something and to figure out how I can, incorporate that into what I might want to do down the road.
I love everything that you said. I think my favorite thing, though, it was the thing that I studied at Harvard. There was a recession, and I thought maybe I wouldn't get work, so I became a musician instead. I love that.
Times were hard in '08, man. I tell you.
I
found an entry-level weather job in Missoula, Montana, for $25,000 a year, and I said I could do that, or let me give this music a shot.
I love it. And can you touch on just a little bit of the second question of like how you went from being the guy who plays the piano to the guy who conducted? Where did you learn those skills?
I took several music classes at Harvard. I was in the theater scene there. I took conducting classes up there. I've taken a few private conducting lessons as well. But I've realized that so much of learning is, I don't know, I guess it's the way I learned so many things. It was by falling on your face and saying, okay, how do I not do that again? Why am I down here? How did I go from standing to, what can I do to make myself a better conductor? It's oftentimes like being in a room in a situation where someone gets called out. Like maybe you're just the rehearsal pianist, and all of a sudden the MD has been taken into another room to work on another arrangement, to work on something, to talk with the director, for whatever reason, he's not there. Okay, Alvin, you got to play. You got to lead the ensemble through this little passage. I'm like, oh, if I had just been sitting there twiddling my thumbs and not watching the MD do what he does, then where am I? Like to be in that situation, it's like, well, you just have to always be like ready for your moment and trust that the things that you've been watching, things that you've been, been doing behind the scenes are like ready to come. And you just never know when it's coming. And I've been thankful to be in a lot of pits. My first Broadway chair was scandalous, and I was in a tough position. I was actually on the road with Darryl doing Memphis, and I had to make a tough decision. Like, do I want to leave this show that's doing really well to go and do a show that didn't look that great, but it was my first chance to be on Broadway. And the things I learned from Joel Fram are I can't count. Like, I've never heard someone sniff so hard. The art of the sniff, I will say, I learned from Joel Fram.
Can you explain what that is? We're all nodding, but just explain what that is.
Well, I mean, Joel would say, okay, so Alvin, here's what you want this singer to come in on beat 4, and you're giving her 4. No. You have to audibly sniff on 3 so that she's ready to come in on 4. Because if you give 4, she's not going to be ready. There's no prep time. You got to sniff on 3 to give her the upbeat for 4, and then she'll come in. Watch, this is what I do. You know, he didn't say all those words in that fashion, but I'm like, that's what he was telling me. But I said, no, the sniff is your friend. I'm sure that plenty of people who've been in the front row of a show, tourists from anywhere, and they're like, what is wrong with this conductor? Does he have a cold? Like, why is he sniffing the sniff is a powerful tool. And I didn't learn that at school. I mean, you learn on the job, and you're like, and that's one of the things I definitely said, I'm stealing that. I got to work on my sniffing.
I love it so much. And I want to just take this moment to pause and say that I'm going to echo that you learn on the job. And one of the things that MUSE is doing as we move forward is creating a program where we're trying to open up the world of who has access to the room, who music assistants in entry-level positions, and trying to make sure that the people in our directory are seen for those jobs, and that the producers who are using our directory are finding the musicians who have those skills. So I want to make sure that you all know about our website, which is museonline.org. At the center of it is a directory where if you are a working musician and a person of color, that you can add yourself to the directory, and there are all these sort of search filters where you can be found. You play this instrument, or you have this skill, or you use this software, so that when people are looking to hire, they can find you. So we want to make sure that you know about that, and also that you just, if you want to keep informed about what we're doing, add yourself. Well, if you're in the directory, you'll automatically be on the mailing list, but also get on the mailing list so that you hear about things like the Music Assistant Fellowship and the master classes that we're going to be offering coming up in the future, so that you can be part of this community, because we want to because all of us are saying you learn on the job. And I know some of you are thinking like, right, how do I get that job? How do I get in the room? And that's part of what we're here to try to answer in the, not today, but in the long term. That's part of what we're doing. Joseph, I'm going to come back to you, because Alvin talked a lot about his first teacher, and then he talked about Joel Fram, my friend also, and such a wonderful conductor, and how you learn from the people who are one level ahead of you, who give you that access. And as we were prepping for this meeting, we recognized that most of the people on this panel have in common either The Color Purple or Motown the Musical, which are both shows that you created, either as the original music director or the orchestrator arranger. And so I also know that many of these people are here because you shepherded them, you found them, you gave them, they and others in our community have been your assistants or your mentees. And I would love to give you a chance to talk about that, about what, first of all, what it is to create work that gives opportunity to so many other musicians, and then what it is to take them under your wing in a very one-on-one personal way.
Wow, okay, so being a mentor, first of all, you have to, how do I describe it? You have to be, I guess, secure enough with yourself that you don't mind giving someone else a chance. And I say that only because some people weren't that good for me coming up, and I'm not giving any names, but I did have some important mentors, and that's where I would learn how to give. So, I mean, just for example, Alvin Hough, he's a wonderful musician, and he was on the workshop of Motown before it even came to Broadway. He was my assistant. I hadn't heard of him, didn't know who he was. I said, oh, this guy's very talented. And then we got to Motown, but because of hierarchy, he wasn't the associate. So he wound up being the second assistant. But I was determined that I wanted each of my assistants to get a chance to conduct. Now, many conductors, many MDs, you don't get that chance maybe once, twice to conduct. He was conducting 2 or 3 times a week. Often he was doing rehearsal piano for me. So I would say that, it was just my wanting to give back to let him do that. I could have been mean and not let him do that and not afford him the opportunity. I could have let him conduct once and say, okay, that's it. But that's just not me. So, I'm saying that each person has to deal with that
Joseph, there's not a mean bone in your body.
Not at all. Not at all.
You know, so speaking of that, so then I mean, I can't take that much credit for the others. I know for Sheilah was the conductor for Color Purple, the first big tour. And I didn't know Sheilah, but they said, well, could you go to Chicago? And they wanted me to hear musicians. And I felt like, you know, listen, this is another Black conductor. I need to be able to be as helpful as I can. So I was really determined to share with Sheilah anything I knew about, you know, Color Purple and the conducting process of what I learned and the music, and sit
Fabulous.
with her and just tell her, here's the deal, look out for this, you know. So for me, again, I didn't want her to fail. It wasn't like I was going to be quiet and just, you know, so again, that's just my nature. Darryl, Archibald, he was the first conductor for Motown. I guess we had the least experience of having to work. I guess he had to watch me conduct the show, and then he had to deal with the musical supervisor. But so our connection is just more from the work of the show, and then he did conduct Color Purple, which I had orchestrated. So that's our connection. The one thing about McElroy that I will say, we both come from church, but our funny story is that we both were in this show Violet way back in the late 90s before it came to Broadway, and we never spoke. We were just, you know, he did his thing and I was in the corner playing, you know, keyboards. But after that, we did connect, and he does credit me. I sort of say I expanded his vocal vocabulary a little bit. And on our Great Joy project, I was just unleashed and let just go, do what you want to do as an arranger. And he did these amazing arrangements, vocal stuff, but he watched what I did harmonically on the piano to the point where he's become this demon where I can't keep up with him. He just creates stuff that doesn't make sense often, but it works. And when I say it doesn't make sense, sometimes it's not like theoretically, harmonically what's supposed to be there, but it works. And it's just one of these the magic of music. So he does sort of credit me a little bit for that. So those are my connections with all of these people. But again, back to mentoring, for me, it's an important thing because I was mentored by some, Beryl Red, I don't know if you know that name, but he was just one of the most amazing giving musicians in the world, the opportunities that he gave me as an orchestrator arranger. So for me, it's just about giving back, because when you give back, it comes back to you.
It's true. That is so true.
Georgia, can I speak to my name being maligned, please?
Yes, please.
No, but I just want to say, one of the things that growing up in church that's put into us, that's poured into us, is service, is giving back. And that idea of when you succeed, that you always reach back and get the next person. So that idea of how we were raised, and that was important to me, and I think for a lot of us who were raised in the church, I'm just speaking for us who come from a different path, that idea of service. So when you have the opportunity to mentor someone else, in theater or wherever it is about giving back and being secure enough in who you are to know that is part of the process. That's Kenny.
That's Kenny.
Oh, sorry, I'm unmuted.
He's actually in rehearsal.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh,
He's
no.
actually directing right now.
I've lost you guys. Oh.
Yeah. So that idea of giving back, and also Beryl Red was also a mentor to me. I had no intention of going down the path of arranging and writing, and Joseph and I met on Violet, and I had just started Broadway Inspirational Voices, and I needed someone to play, and I had actually reached out to him the first year, and he didn't know who I was, so he didn't pay me no mind, but that's okay. The second year after we worked, then he started playing for the choir, and then when it came time to do Great Joy, we just started working together, and we become writing partners. And though I'll send stuff to him, and he's like, "What in the world is this?" I know when I'm creating it, that I hear him playing it in my head. So even though he may not think it's the case, I actually see his hands spread all the way across our 88 keys, playing what it will be. And so we have that kind of a partnership. And there was another thing that you said that I just wanted to touch on, which was coming into the room, which I think is essential. Yes, MUSE is about creating these pipelines, but what's interesting, I was working with a director, and I was interviewing him actually for a class, and he said one of the most disappointing moments he had was when he looked around the rehearsal room during a rehearsal process and everybody was on their phones. And so it's so essential when you get that opportunity to be in the room that you're paying attention, that you're taking in everything. We're now conditioned to never be without this thing, right? But a lot of the learning that we learn as we're coming up is through listening, to having access and being in the room. And then you have to have your eyes and ears and heart open so that you can learn things that may not be just what's written down on the page, but how to connect to people, how to talk to people, the musical director, the music team, how they have to go between so many different creative types. You know, the director wants one thing, the composer wants one thing, the choreographer wants one thing, you know, and you have to be able to synthesize that and keep everybody happy. So there's certain skills that you learn that I feel like from church, that idea of being sensitive to the mood and setting the mood that prepares for the pastor to speak. You know, the musician has, the musical director, the minister of music has a set list of songs that they prepared, but they're always sensitive to what's going on. And at a moment's notice, that will shift based on the needs of what's happening in the service. And I love that kind of preparation that growing up in church gave me, to have that kind of sensitivity, to learn music by ear. My sister led our youth choir, and we would come together on rehearsal on Thursday, and she would teach 5 songs by ear, and we would sing them on Sunday. There was no going home looking at music. There were no recordings. There was no getting up on Sunday morning, I'm gonna warm up and have my tea and honey. You got up, you got there, you got the Sunday school, and you were in that choir stand, and you knew those songs. So that kind of skill set, combined with the accumulation of the skills that you get, that I was fortunate enough to get in high school with a choral teacher who made us learn how to sight read. You know, those combinations of things, I think, allow you to have a different kind of perspective and an entryway into the musical theater field that isn't, there's no degree where you learn to go be the musical director, right? It's an accumulation of a lot of skills. And I feel like the church skills that I got just soaked in from being around musicians all my life and having to be like pushed into playing for Sunday school, and then playing for a children's choir, and then playing for the youth choir. You know, just always given that opportunity and that love and support and that ability to fail, but having people around you who rallied around you and challenged you to step into spaces that you might not have stepped into yourself. The same thing applies when you have mentors in the musical theater field who say, okay, I see something in you, come on. And they teach you the things that you need to know as you go on that journey that you're not going to find on a piece of paper.
If I didn't already do this for a living, I would want to do it now. You guys are so inspiring. This is, I think, I mean, I'm taking in how much it matters that you're a musical omnivore, how much you just want to, you love music and you want to consume music, you want to learn about music. But Michael, I love your point about how important it is to be attentive. And when you finally are given the opportunity to be in the room, that you are present in the room, you're present in the moment and recognizing the things that you can learn from the people who are already doing it. There's so much that you can learn just by watching. And Darryl, yes, I'm throwing Darryl, and I had talked about maybe that too, that there's so much about leadership that is also the job of a music director or conductor, or even in many cases a side musician or an arranger or something. There are so many more time management and people management skills that come into play. And as someone who's worked in theaters all around the country, like going from one theater to the next theater, and different people, different personalities, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, Darryl.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly circle back to something that Alvin and Michael talked about. I think being really curious, you don't have to actually be in the room to start learning and honing your skills. You can do that before. Just being curious about, you know, everything. If there's a conductor that you like, watch, like Alvin was saying, watch what they do. Pick and choose the different, you know, aspects of their conducting that you think are great or that communicate what you think needs to be communicated. And when Michael was talking about put your phone away, that's a good thing. I mean, notice when you're listening to music, it's, you know, when we're in this business, like Alvin was saying, his mind, he can't really listen for entertainment because his mind keeps, like, you know, taking things apart and being technical. That's a really wonderful thing to do. when you're listening to, an arrangement by Michael McElroy, it's like, why does it sound that way? What is he doing that makes that part there sound really good? Analyze it. If you can write it out or play it on the piano and, listen to all the different styles. Why does Bach sound like Bach? Why does, jazz sound like jazz? Try to analyze these things and, figure them out for yourself. I think that that's something that a lot of people don't really do. And it also will help you figure out all the different, you kind of unlock the key to a lot of different styles that we have to do in musical theater, is you're curious about how these things are put together. But going to time management. So I think one of the biggest things for me as a touring conductor is going into a different city, sometimes every week, is knowing how to read the room and knowing how to, take command and control the room without being a despot. But at the same time, every city's different. Sometimes you have musicians who, are there just kind of like punching the clock and have really no interest in being there. And so you have to kind of know how to deal with them and make them as excited about the show as you are. Because there's nothing worse than having a pit full of people who aren't interested in what they're performing. So if you can walk into the room with an excitement about the material and get them excited about it, I think that's a good start. The next thing is that you should definitely have like a set plan when you're taking the orchestra through the show. For me, because you only sometimes get 4-hour reads. In fact, most of the time you get 4-hour reads, and the show's like 2 hours and 43 minutes if I'm looking at Motown. So how do you talk them through it, tell them all of the little technical things. So what I tend to do is I do the same plan, and I know there's some people on the call, Dave Matos and Trevor Holder, even Alvin, who know how I kind of do a room. So I'll come in, we start right on the clock, even if musicians are late. And they'll just have to catch up. But I have a set plan on how I explain the show to them. I basically start at the top. I will take them through, if there are songs that segue into each other, say the first 7 numbers segue, I will talk them through those first 7 numbers, exactly how it's done in the show, any technical things that they need, and then we run that segment. And then we do the same thing all the way through the end of the show. I can't spend a lot of time when you only have a 4-hour read with a new orchestra on little minute things. A lot of times you can leave that to the section leader. As far as, I'm not going to get stuck in, oh, bowing, you guys should all be up bow here, down bow there. It's not important. Let the section leader deal with that stuff. Same with articulation, unless there's something really egregious that's going on in rehearsal, leave it to the section leader to, figure out how to deal with dynamics and not dynamics, but articulation. The other thing, problem solving, is another really big thing, because if you go into a city and say there's a doubler who's supposed to play flute and clarinet and saxophone, and their flute playing is horrible. In that moment, if they're playing a passage, you can become the orchestrator. Sorry, Zane. Sorry, everybody on the call, Joseph. But you can tell them, okay, play that passage on the clarinet, because if I think the orchestrator would rather have a really good sounding clarinet in that passage than a flute that is horrible sounding, okay? And same thing, for Motown at the very top, there's this passage with this really high trumpet part. There was one city where the trumpet player during the entire rehearsal played it down the octave. And Trevor and Dave, my guitar and my bass player, said, aren't you going to tell him to play it up? I said, no, I'm going to let him do that for the actual performance, because I'd rather have it down the octave than have the whole thing splat. And I know if he's playing it down the octave during this whole thing, that's the problem. And I told him, I said, if you feel more comfortable playing it down, play it down, okay? It's being able to problem solve and take command and not worry about, a lot of the little things like, oh, if I change this orchestration, will, somebody be upset with me? It's like, if it's going to make this show sound better for that city, change the orchestration. Let's see. Oh, and the other big thing, make sure you alert the orchestra to anything that happens in a show that could change the show, okay? That's a big thing, because if you are in the middle of the show and there's an actor who has a tendency to sing, way ahead of the beat or way behind the beat or skip over, dialogue or you skip over lyrics, you want the orchestra to know that, okay? Because the horrible thing is you get into performance, if you haven't warned them that this could happen and it happens, they're just all looking at you like, okay, we don't know what to do. So warn people and have a plan if something like that happens of what they should do, how they should follow you, what kind of cues you're going to give. And the big thing always, at least for me, it's worked for me, your conducting should be the exact same every performance, especially when you're touring. There should be no surprises. There shouldn't be moments of inspiration. Sorry, for those people who,
No
it should
inspiration.
be exactly the same. And that's because you're going into a city where they don't know the show. All they know is what you've given them in rehearsal. So whatever you gave them in rehearsal is what you need to give the orchestra in performance. So I remember when I was in the Philharmonic Institute, and this is classical music, conductors like Bernstein and Giuliani, when we'd have master classes and things with them, all of their work happened in rehearsal, but in performance, I mean, Bernstein would dance on the podium and just wave his arms and point. And everybody was like, how do you follow that? It's like, because all of that was in rehearsal. Musical theater, very different. You can't, in performance, you can try, dance around the podium, with an orchestra that's only been, playing the music for like 4 hours. You have to give them exactly what's needed to get through the performance. So there's my little spiel on conducting for tour.
I mean, your answer right there is like the most efficient, most complete. You're like, you're hired. I don't even know how you conduct. You're hired. You're so good at this. Thank you. All right, Sheilah, I want to ask you a question. We've talked a little bit about how you get into the business, and now we're talking a little bit about technical things, but I want to just call attention to the fact that there are very few Black women conductors in this business, and you are at the forefront of the women who do this. And I want to talk a little bit about representation and how important that is. I'm going to ask you to say, why do you think there aren't more women, especially women of color, who do this for a living? And what are some of the barriers that you had to step over in order to get yourself onto the podium?
Well, I'm only speculating, but from my experience, so many times women are so prepared. Technically, they have all the skills that any male would have, but many times they're not considered. And certainly a woman of color is probably the last one to be considered of all the groups of people out there. And my experience goes back a long time ago. Things are a little different now. But even now, there are not many women of color who choose that profession because it's just easier to go another path and not deal with all of the speculation. Is she good? Does she know what can she handle? Can she lead? Those are all the things that people think of. And they're very nervous. I remember when getting jobs, many times producers would come to the sessions where I had to lead the orchestra, and they were all concerned whether I could handle it. It's like, oh, this may be a little bit too much for her. She's a woman. She can't do it. Now, here again, I'm talking about 30 years ago, but I've still every time you get on the podium, you are trailblazing. And I think so many of these women don't want to go through that because they know they're good, they know they have the skills, and they just find that it's just it hasn't been inviting. And so MUSE and Maestro and all these organizations that are causing everybody else to look at people in a different way are there now and put in place. Of course, I wish I had those things in place for me years ago. Those are things that are needed and necessary to say, come on in. You've got the skills, you've got the background. And one other thing I was going to say was that a lot of women haven't done a lot of theater, but they have the musical skills from church and from other avenues. Many of them are classically trained. So many of them have conducted, and you'll find in the the classical symphonic conducting arena, there are a lot more Black women that are represented, because they can go straight in there, because people look at their skills, they don't look at the color, they don't look at their gender, and they get in. If they're good, they get the job. And I think theater needs to open up the same way. And that's just sort of an admonition to all of the groups now that are saying, come on, we want to include you. We have to look at people and actually give them a chance, and also make the environment inviting enough, so that when you go in there, sometimes you're going to fall on your face. I've done it. I've certainly, I'd be the first to admit, I've made some mistakes. But so many times, if you are a woman and you're of color and you make a mistake, it's like, oh my God, the world has blown up. Instead of saying, okay, you've got it. Just hold on, everybody. I've got it. There was just a little mistake, a little tiny thing that happened here. And I think that with the scrutiny is so difficult to deal with as a performer, because you know your work. You're in your heart, you want to do this. And I think that they have to understand that it's just coming into an environment, knowing you're going to have to probably be looked at for the first few minutes in a kind of a strange way, and get over it and have the courage. And I tell you that I have been told by some contractors that I probably would not get much work, or that they didn't like the way the local contractors in different towns would say things like, is she gonna wear that? Is she gonna do, a lot of things that were not even important to the music itself. But once I started conducting, then they'd go, oh, well, she's okay, that's fine. Then the next time I would come in to that particular city, it was, okay, here's Sheilah. So now when I go to cities, everybody knows who I am, because I stick out like a sore thumb. But they are welcoming, because these are the same musicians that I'll see in the pit from year to year, and they know who I am, and they go, oh, Sheilah, you're here, we're glad to see you. But I had to go through so much to get there. And I don't think that nowadays the scrutiny will be so hard and so tough for women as they were way back when I got started. But that's just me saying that. I think that these, like I said, Maestra and MUSE are here for that reason, to get more women involved and more people of color, and to tell them that, and we have to talk to contractors too and say, look, this is a person who's coming in who's competent. We wouldn't send them out there unless they were good at what they do. And if everybody feels comfortable, then that person feels comfortable on the podium. And that's the important thing, is feeling comfortable.
I love that, Sheilah. Thank you. I sort of want to open it up to the rest of the panelists and say, do the rest of you have experience or ideas about this one strike and you're out idea, that you're held to a higher standard or a different standard, and that you have to be the representative of all people in some way? Does anyone want to speak to that?
Yes.
I know that. Oh, go ahead. Michael? Go ahead.
Oh, wait, Michael, you're muted.
That was my answer. I just wanted to quickly say, Alvin said something, I don't know when you said this, either it was in one of your interview things for our website or in a meeting, but it stuck with me, and it hasn't really, even as I listen to the credits and things that people have done, and also the history of all these wonderful artists, we do tend to get put in, oh, if it's a show with an African-American cast, and we don't always get those same opportunities when you have the skill set here to be able to conduct or musical direct any show that's put in front of you with the background. It's usually like, oh, here's that show, and then there's the 8 or 9 people that they're going to go to. So it is also, it's about that idea of not having to be the one representative, but I think what will help that is if there's more representation throughout, as opposed to just when there's a Motown or a Dreamgirls or a Color Purple, which is great. I'm not knocking that at all, but I'm just saying, all these people, all these artists have the ability to do the Oklahomas and to do all the other shows as well. And once again, that's also about access as well, even for us. You know what I mean? It's like people work with the assistants, you know, the associates that they usually want to work with, the people that, you know, and so I think that the more we provide those pipelines and mentorships and internships, and also as the industry we're watching is slowly changing in this moment of stasis, to really look at itself and say, what have we been perpetuating that is a reflection of what's happening in the world, and how can we change it? We will start to see a shift with more people of color and more women going across the board, as opposed to just when they need you because they think that's all you can do, when we're obviously capable of much more.
Amen. Darryl, will you speak to that?
Yeah, no, I just really quickly, I know for me, there's something that I did going back to, you know, when I was a teenager in classical music, even in the way I dressed, there was this expectation. I mean, I couldn't wear jeans and feel that I was being taken seriously. So I had to wear khakis, suit pants, and button downs to everything that I did. I mean, other people in the orchestra could be sitting there in jeans or cutoffs and everything. And I felt this thing, because I was the only Black person in a lot of the orchestras I played in, that I had to present a different, you know, thing than everybody else. That I had to present, quote unquote, this professionalism that other people didn't have to do. And the same thing as conductor, standing on the podium in front of an entirely white orchestra. Other conductors, I thought they could walk in wearing jeans, but if I walked in wearing a pair of jeans, I would not be taken as seriously. And so it was this conscious thing that I did where I actually made myself very aloof and distant and detached from all the musicians and everybody, to just give this kind of, make myself an enigma, to just make it seem that I had this importance when I was first, coming out and conducting, which I don't think that a lot of white conductors have to do.
I remember, to dovetail that, I remember going to an orchestra rehearsal somewhere in Alabama, and this was years ago. And I just had on all black, very casual clothing. And the guy came in and said, "Oh, you're the stage manager." This was a local contractor. "I need some more stands, and I need this, and I need that, and whatever." So I didn't say anything. I said, "Okay, I'll get those for you." And I went and got somebody, a real stagehand, to get all that taken care of. And so then when it was time to start the rehearsal, I got up on the podium. And everybody in the room was like, "Oh my God." The local contractor was red because he had fussed at me the whole time prior to the rehearsal. He had said a lot of things that were unkind. And when I got up to conduct, I said, "I'm Sheilah Walker. I'm your conductor for the morning." And he was red-faced. And later on, he did apologize, not in front of the orchestra, but he did apologize to me privately. And he said, "Oh, well, you look so young." So I didn't know that you were the conductor, because you do look very young. And so those moments can happen, just because of who you are and and what you look like. So we had to work a little harder, dress a little differently and everything, in order to get that kind of respect that we needed.
That's astounding.
Yeah.
Darryl, I have a feeling that we could tell, everyone has a story, and we could all tell stories in this vein, but I also know that you have a story about how you solved that problem for yourself based on the contracts and the way you negotiated your way out of that. I'd love for you to share that.
Yeah, going back to what Michael McElroy was talking about, of people kind of pigeonholing us into like one certain genre of music or show, if it's a Black show. Years ago, when Ain't Misbehavin' had this resurgence and everybody was doing in all the regional theaters, I was getting called to do it everywhere. And my agent devised this plan, because I thought, well, I want to do something else other than Ain't Misbehavin' for the rest of my life. And my agent at the time, we came up with this idea, well, they really want you to do this show, Ain't Misbehavin', so we'll tell them you'll do the show if they give you King and I, which is on their next season, or if they give you Funny Girl, which is on their next season, And she had pushback in the beginning, but it worked, where I was able to like do the 8 misbehaving for them, which is great, and also be guaranteed to do something else on their season. And that, at least regionally, was how I was able to get into a lot of these theaters, whether it's Utah Shakespearean Festival or Sacramento Music Circus or any of these places, and actually do other things than the quote unquote Black shows. It's because we made a concerted effort to tell people that I was capable of doing these other things. And once I did the other shows for them, they would call me, time and time again to see if I was available to do all kinds of stuff, but they didn't see me that way. And so the key was to show them that I could do it, which I hate the idea that we have to go that far to like, oh, we have to show you that you're capable of doing this. They just, can't look at your resume or anything and say, oh, you can do this. You have to prove to them. I don't like that, but that's what we ended up having to do. And it worked. I wish it was that way for New York, though.
And I'm going to jump in to piggyback on something that you said, Darryl, and Michael earlier. It's also a situation in which you have to be on all the time. If you're in a rehearsal space and they say, okay, 10-minute break, take 10, it's not a 10 for you. It doesn't matter what could be happening. You could be fooling around, playing something on the piano, different show, something in the future, maybe something you just wrote, and someone, oh, what was that? What was that? Can we work that into the arrangement for this song? Can I use that somewhere down the road? It feels as if for us, it is unfortunately a constant audition. It's like, even if you're in one room and the people you're around, you're part of a team, you're putting together a amazing product, you're still auditioning for the next one. There's no guarantee that these people are going to call you for something else. And even if you're goofing around, your goofing around has to still be somewhat serious because people are still looking at you in a way that a white counterpart may not be, viewed. So I try to keep that in mind, when, the word break almost doesn't really exist until you get home and you get put in your PJs. Like you have to be on from the instant you walk into the room to the instant you leave the room. And it's just it's a different and higher standard. Like, I mean, I'm sure we've all heard things like my uncle used to say to be early is to be on time is to be late. Like, you got to be there early. Like, you can't walk into a 10 o'clock rehearsal at 9:58 and try to put everything together and do it. No, you better be there at 9:30. Make sure that all your stuff is taken care of so that people can say, oh, okay, he's ready. She's ready,
Right.
And we have to know everything. It's, if we ask a question or if we're uncertain of something, it comes off very differently than a lot of times our white counterparts. So we have to go into the room knowing our parts, everybody else's parts, the directors, the choreographer, everything. Because if we ask a question or if we, make it seem as if we're uncertain about just the slightest thing, it makes it seem as if we don't know what we're doing, as opposed to we just weren't informed about something. So that's another thing, to make sure that you're way ahead of the game. Be prepared. And I know Valerie Joubert, who when I did Lion King, is on the Zoom call here today. She was a musical director when I first joined Lion King. And I remembered when I was learning it, because I was going to be the keyboard swing, which meant I had to know all 3 keyboard parts and also know how to play the scores for rehearsal, everything. And I remember they said, when you get here, you'll have a week or so before you have to worry about playing. And I knew in the back of my head, I better show up knowing everything when I get there. And turns out that first Wednesday that I got there, one of the associates, Angela, said she had family in town and she wanted to sub out and conduct. And so they said, are you ready? And I just dove right in, because I thought, if I say no, then even though they told me I didn't have to be prepared, it would reflect badly on me. So I'm just saying, show up to everything way ahead of the game, knowing your stuff. Don't think that you can learn or figure out things in rehearsal. Try as much as you can to be prepared for day one and know as much as you can.
It's interesting because we started this conversation from a place of representation, but I think that advice that you just gave is for everybody in the room.
Yes.
But acknowledging that I'm the white person on this panel, I just also want to say for those of you in the room who are here because you want to be an advocate or an ally, that is the first thing I say is let's listen, that this is that our colleagues are saying we're held to a different standard, we're held to a higher standard. There are things that we experience that you don't know, that you don't experience. And when you say, how can I help and how can I show up? That's the first thing, is start paying attention to those dynamics that are going on in the room. And in addition to like signing up for the mailing lists and donating the money and all the things that are advocate work, also in your one-on-one life, what are you doing to acknowledge what your colleague is experiencing that's different from what you're experiencing? How can you show up and be present in that moment? We're going to shift to Q&A now. And I just now noticed that the chat is disabled. So instead of, is there someone who can enable the chat so that people can ask questions? Oh, there it is. Now the chat has been enabled. But also, just so we're not sitting around waiting, if someone has a question, just unmute yourself and let's see if we can at least get the first one out that way. You answered everything. You answered all
This is not a question. This is just a comment to say I revere all of you guys. And the common thread. What's the common thread? Color Purple, Motown.
Emily.
What's the common thread? Color Purple, Motown, Violet, right? Isn't that the common thread?
Ragtime.
There you go. Anyway.
But isn't that sort of the point, is that like we're listing off the shows that are predominantly Black shows or that have Black casts? And so we're saying, so that's where we can get the Black music directors and the Black arrangers and the Black orchestrators, is when we have the shows that are about Black themes, as opposed to what Darryl was saying is like, I can do King and I. Yeah, I can do Pal Joey, I can do Hello Dolly, I can do Fiddler on the Roof. I can do those shows too. I think that is the first big shift that has to happen in our industry. All right, I'm going to read this question. I would love to hear from Sheilah what she would recommend for someone without plans to head to New York City. I'm rather settled in Cleveland, but I'm still looking for ways to advance my career locally. From Rachel Woods.
Good. Hi, Rachel. As I said, my start came out of choral directing in a high school for performing arts, but it was also connected to theater there. And here's the thing. You just have to get in. Maybe I played auditions a lot. If you're a good reader, pianist, it's great to get in there, get your resume into the producer, the directors, and just be seen. Ask friends who are singers or actors who want to audition for those shows or write for them, coach them, go in and play. Most of the time, and I will say this, 99% of the time, if you're real good at accompanying, they look at the actor, performer, but they're also looking at you. This is how I got work in New York. I would stand in line at Equity or at that time the Men's Golf or somewhere else, and I would see friends and say, let me play for you. Just let me go in there. And once I got in, the producers would say, who are you? Who are you? We've never seen you before. And then I would get other work as a result of that. So do that locally too. You can just make sure somebody sees you and make sure you're ready, as the guys have said before, but also make sure that you have your resume ready and you can play for someone, and also be a good reader.
And that's also what MUSE is going to do, is stand in that gap in terms of, making sure that there are internships and mentorship possibilities for young artists from around the country who want to come here and have those opportunities to assist. And also the programming and the educational master classes and things that we're going to be doing are specifically to speak to young artists, specifically Black and Brown artists who are wanting to who have that passion and want to know what that next step is to provide those kinds of opportunities.
Any further questions? Oh, here's the next one. Would any of you on the panel be interested in working in Europe at an opera house on a full-time basis? This is a job offer. So somebody, you can respond personally to that job offer. That's great. Janet Jackson Tyler Lummer. So if anyone is interested in going to Europe to work on an opera on a full-time basis, there is a job offer waiting for you. And I will encourage anyone who is in the room, not just on the panel, to respond and get in touch. That is the value of community. Then several thank yous, some thank yous here. Agree, there's still so much work to do to incorporate people of color in this industry. That is why we're here. I'm going to let everyone have a chance to just speak again. Oh, hi, Alvin and family. Come on. Hello, Alvin and the next generation.
Someone woke up from their naps. This is Sam.
Oh.
This is Camille. Say hi.
All right, there is one more question that's just come in. They are so cute. Let's see. Let's start right here. This question might be best for Darryl, but I'd love to hear any response. I found in undergrad that different music programs are very compartmentalized, and as primarily a brass instrumentalist, it was very hard to find a place to fit into my studio being interested in musical theater, as well as finding connections with musical theater students being an instrumental major. What are some ways that you all have worked to combine various musical disciplines? I'll say this does really true in the academic world for sure, that programs are very compartmentalized. Any thoughts about how to reach across those departments or meet people interdisciplinary?
Just quickly, at USC, I know that the departments were really separated. You know, the violin and opera department, or the string and opera departments, were like where all the accompanists would go and play, and you couldn't even get an accompanist to come over to the wind department. Musical theater was kind of non-existent. But if you want to get into musical theater, I would say sometimes you have to reach outside of the school and see what kind of local productions are going on, you know, find, you know, the contractors for those theaters, and, you know, let them know that you're interested in it. Because not all schools have musical theater programs. If you have one at your school, then, you know, talk to whoever contracts the orchestra and see if you can get in that way. But I would say, for me, I branched out and I was working while I was in school, doing, you know, shows and concerts and different things like that outside of school, and trying to do as much as I could. So if you can find theaters that are doing shows, that would be great.
I'm going to throw these just to the group at large. There was one earlier that I skipped, which is, what would you offer in terms of mentorship to a second career person, someone who isn't young or newly out of college? This is from my friend Dion, I know. And I think that's something I'd like to speak to right here at the end, that a lot of people think mentors are for like 18 to 25-year-olds, but what's the value of having that one-on-one relationship with someone who's ahead of you, even when you are established or at a point where people assume that you're past that? Joseph, why don't you take that one? It's been a minute since you spoke. I'm going to throw it to you.
So I would say, depending on where what their person's end game is, what their goals are. I mean, do they want to have a professional career, or is it something they want to do just for their own enjoyment, will determine, you know, I would say what level mentorship you would have. You know, if someone wants to be a better choral conductor at their church or something, but if they, you know, or maybe a smaller regional company, but if you want to be, you know, the top in your field at an older age, I probably would mentor them away from it, or, you know, just saying, you know, maybe there's something else you do. But I just really, I think a person has to really clearly define what their goal is and what level they want to be at. You know, if someone would ask me, you know, let's say, well, can you mentor me on orchestrating, you know, a Broadway show? You know, I'm just saying, well, why would I do that if you're not going to be doing, you know, I could help you with skills. But again, I think we have to really figure out at what level the person wants to reach. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Just because I see Emily Grishman on, and I haven't seen you in a long time, but I remember when I first worked on Broadway, I was a terrible reader, but I would go into her office before the rehearsal and look at the music and take pictures of anything that was difficult. So then when I showed up at rehearsal, I had the music down.
Great.
But that's when I first started, you know, working on subbing on shows. And I remember she would let me do that. Thank you.
David, thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. And that makes me
Lovely.
think that in summary, I want to throw each of you a question, which
And
is,
now I'm a better reader now too. So that's
let the record show. That I'm the mom of a teenager, and one of the things I say to my daughter all the time is like, we have to figure out how to teach you how to be successful in this moment. Being successful in this moment is different from being like an overall success or being held to someone else's standard of success. But how can you be successful in this algebra class where the teacher is not kind? Or how can you be successful in this moment where you have a friend, you know, whatever the situation is? And so in closing, I'll say, and this answers one of the other questions that came out about someone who is interested in how to make the jump from a local market to New York. Like what do I need to know if I'm going to make it to New York? What is a piece of advice that you give someone to set them up for success in this line of work? Alvin, why don't you go first?
Sure, I'm happy to. I say, gosh, your best friend is yes. I know when I moved here, I didn't fully believe that I belonged. But when someone, you make your business cards, you make your website, you do all the things, and you're on the ground and you're searching for what you can find. And then, well, what did I find when I first got here? Can you play for this like first grade graduation ceremony? I'm like, sure, how much does it pay? The sandwiches at the reception? Great, I'll take it. Because at that point, no one knows who I am. No one knows me from anybody else. It's like, but I need people to see me. And I need people to see me in the best way that I can. I think, I know I'll give it to other folks. The thing, well, back when things were up and running, I did a lot of Broadway classroom seminars, Broadway workshop, and talk to kids, talk to teenagers. And the one thing I always wanted to say to them is, when I was growing up, I didn't have social media. None of us did. Facebook wasn't around. That kind of stuff wasn't around. And now it's everywhere. And one, bad half misstep could send you down a path you don't want to go down. It's like clicking send could be your worst enemy. Put your best self out there. Make sure whatever videos you are out there are good videos. Don't, half-ass it at a performance. Make sure anything that can be recorded, anything that you could put out there is a good reflection of you, because you never know, not in this Big Brother sense, but just you never know who's watching you. And you always want someone to say, I want this person because I think they're good, period. Their talent is good. Their talent is enough. Their energy, their personality, I want to be in a room with them so that I can learn from them, and maybe they'll learn something from me, and you could collaborate and work together and make something special.
We have 1 minute officially. Does anybody else want to answer that question of what someone coming into the scene in New York, how do you set yourself up for success? Darryl.
I just have a quick one. I think that treat everything that you're doing now, whether you're doing a small pageant, you're doing church, treat everything you're doing as if it were Broadway. Don't think of, I'm doing these little gigs or this little job. Think of everything, form your work ethic, form the way that you do rehearsals, the way that you perform. If the scenery is falling around you, trudge forward as if you're doing a Broadway show, okay? And I think that's probably some of the best advice, because when you try to make that leap, it'll be so much easier, as opposed to if you're kind of playing for where you are.
Can I just say one last thing? And just that is, reputation is everything. It means more than your talent. People want to work with people that they like to work with. And so I've seen a lot of people who are super talented, but difficult, and nobody wants to work with. So reputation is everything. Showing up on time, being ready, being prepared is absolutely essential. Even after I'd been here working for over 20 years, I still had a director who told me after they cast me that they asked 6 people about me before they made that decision to cast me, right? So your reputation is essential. If you practice excellence all the time, if you only do it sometimes, what you get good at is being mediocre, right? So always, as Darryl said, be excellent in everything. And the last thing I'll say is, NYC is not for everybody, right? And if one thing we're talking about is living around the country and making a living, that it's not just the career here, it is, can you live in New York City? New York City is not for everybody, right? You have to walk these streets and know that this is a place that speaks to you and that you can live in, right? Or else there are many wonderful places around the country, many theaters that you can work at where you may be a better fit for you. So don't feel that this has to be the place. Go where your heart and where you know you can thrive.
Love what you do. Love it, and it'll show.
I think if you have to have the passion for it. You know, it's got to be what you really, really want, and you have to see it.
Yes.
Often I tell people you have to see what you want to be before you can be it. You have to see that and visualize it, and then go after that, and you know, and just know that it's for you, and then, you know, and be the best at it, because there's always going to be someone coming up after you.
Thank you all for that, for all of your wisdom and everything. And Joseph, I think what MUSE is trying to do is make sure for the people who are looking that we can be seen, that this group of people can be seen, and that the representation of you and your work and your careers can inspire the next generation of people who want to follow in your footsteps. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. I encourage all of you to go to museonline.org, sign up for the mailing list, join the directory, follow us on Instagram or Twitter, or join the Facebook group, all of that stuff, so that you can be part of the community and you can know about the mini masterclasses and opportunities that we're offering next. If you want to take a minute and just say hi in the chat, we'd love to know who you are. And we're going to officially end, though I'm happy to stay around and do a little small talk for those of you who can stay. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Bye.